welcome all of you here. I'm assuming the rest of you can hear me. It sounds like Lynn gave me a message saying he could see and hear me, so that's good news. At least one person can, so I assume the rest of you can as well. I'm Daryl Bick. I'm going to be your host for this afternoon. I just want to remind you again, I think by now most of you know the routine, but if you haven't been on all day, you can ask your questions. There's going to be, hopefully, Wendi says, a Q&A time at the end, depending on how our presentation goes. But in any case, you've got the panel on the right-hand side, unless you've made the screen big, then you won't see the panel. But if you have it small, you see the panel on the right-hand side where you can put your questions in the chat feature. Of course, you can save them up later. We'll open the mics later on. For now, the mics will all be shut off so that Wendi doesn't get interrupted constantly by random noises coming from your end. But in any case, so you'll have a chance to answer questions later. I'll just introduce Wendi a little bit. Wendi Park and her husband Harold founded Forever Families of Canada in 2014 out of a desire for churches across Canada to effectively journey with children and families in hard places and hard times, I assume. Based in Winnipeg, along with their 5 kids and 2 grandbabies, Wendi leads a growing team. That's what it says here. Wendi leads a growing team across 5 different provinces, connecting churches to child servicing agencies, equipping congregations through online workshops and coaching, and mobilizing them with meaningful opportunities to care for children and families through their care portal technology. Today, Wendi is going to be speaking to us on 5 ways your whole church can become invaluable in the community. I'm looking forward to hearing you again, Wendi. We had Wendi in our church in, when was that? February, January?
Yeah, I think it was in February.
Yeah, I think so. I think it was well received. Of course, we didn't have anybody in the audience, so as far as I could tell, it was well received. But
nobody gave me negative feedback. Let's just say that.
Go. Yeah,
there's nobody there, not even the church mice.
I certainly wasn't, giving you thumbs down from the background or anything like that. So. Okay, so we'll turn the time over to you, and look forward to hearing this.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for this opportunity to be with you. This certainly isn't foreign. Maybe it's different that we're doing it all virtual, but I can remember as a little girl coming with my little tote bag of little toys and word puzzles and things like that, sitting in the back pew of these conferences and being part of this EMMC convention. As you know, you may know that I have grown up in EMMC as a child of Alan and Anita, their daughter, their baby. And it's certainly good to be back, and it doesn't feel foreign, and I hope you feel comfortable. I'm just going to invite you. This is going to be our living room. This is a living room that's not quite fair because I get to do all the talking, but I do hope that you blow up the chat, that you do put some questions there, comments. We're here to learn together. So this isn't something that I'm the expert and you have to all listen. I know you come with a vast amount of different expertise and experiences. I'm sure we could have each one of us share experiences and examples of the things I'm going to share. But hopefully there's some things in my unique journey that God's put me on and my husband on that will somehow impact you as well, because I feel that as we share stories together, we learn together. And I'm certainly excited and honored to share a bit of our journey here with you on 5 ways your whole church can become invaluable part in the community. And this is so important. And yes, I do have 2 grandbabies. They're 5-year-old and almost 2. You ask why? Well, I cheated. And God said I could cheat because he says to take in people that need families. And God brought me some beautiful daughters after we had our 2 biological kids. They happen to be our youngest. Now they're 10 and 12. And then we have 2 19-year-olds and a 26-year-old that has moved on out of our house, but she lives close by and has 2 babies, and we love them dearly. And so that's a bit about my family. And I wish I could share more, but I guess that'll have to happen when we can have some more conversations. But yeah, and so I guess this topic is birthed out of not just a good topic that I think that every church should know. This is something that's very near and dear to me. So it's hard not to get passionate about this topic. This is why my husband and I quit our day jobs to do Forever Families, because we just saw a huge need, a huge opportunity for the local church to really connect, equip, and be mobilized to be able to journey with children and families. My husband was working in the prisons and in counseling. He's a therapist. And for myself, I was doing community development and leadership and in nonprofit with the Salvation Army. And we saw so many opportunities, and yet it was sort of outsourced, and the church was not central there. And it was sort of write the check, but don't get engaged as much. And we saw, wow, what a missed opportunity for the church. What a missed opportunity for these individuals that are going through hard times. And so that put us on this journey for Forever Families, and maybe later on we can chat a little bit more about that. But first off, I just want to acknowledge the land that we are all on. Some of you might be from US and South America or other countries. I'm not sure who you are all. You can put it in the chat where you're coming from. But I just wanted to ask you where you are from. I just want to acknowledge that I'm on Treaty 1 land, and we'll get into why this is important to acknowledge. And I want to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today, and that we find ourselves in different parts of this country, likely. And while we meet today on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands, which we all call home. And we do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their culture. And from coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. So why would we find this important? Being Mennonites, maybe that's not part of our background. Maybe that's not part of what God feels that we feel that God has put on our hearts. But it's to acknowledge actually that there's been harm and mistakes of the past and the present done within our lands. And we as the church, even the Mennonites, are part of that. And it's something that we have to bring with us to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. So yeah, now we're going to dig into the next hour or so. We're going to dig into 5 ways your whole church can become invaluable to the community. I imagine that you picked it, one, maybe because I'm Alan Kaler's daughter and you want to see if there's some resemblance. Yes, we got the nose, we got the profile. So yes, you can check that. But maybe, hopefully, it's not because of that. Hopefully you're here because this is a topic that matters to you. You want your church to be engaged in the community. You want to be impactful in your community. And even now, as we look at the pandemic and we're all having to pivot and stuff, like how do we become effective in these changing times? And we're certainly all challenged by it for sure. And so, yes, we're going to just dig right in. I'm going to go into the first way. And we're talking about roots here. I wish I could take in more. I'm also in another conference, so I'm double heading it here with the NATE Symposium. But I know that our topic here is on and about our roots. And I think that is actually the key, probably the starting point to being effective in your community is actually knowing your own roots as a church, as a denomination. And it's vital that we function out of a healthy understanding of who we are. And I'm not talking about denominational, what is our doctrinal statements? I'm not talking about what your preference is. Is it worship songs or hymns or those type of things, or our traditions or the things that we get fundamentalists stuck on? I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about those core things that God has rooted us in, that make us alive in Christ, that give us a tree to stand on. We're talking about those roots. In our role in Forever Families, we deal with the whole spectrum of child welfare, and that's how we love to connect the church into this sphere. It's so needed that the church has a huge place to step into. And when we're talking about child welfare, we look in foster care or adoption, we talk a lot about having healthy attachments. And this is very critical. And Harold, he could do a whole workshop on growing healthy attachments and how important it is to build those healthy relationships between the child and the caregiver, and how essential it is for their well-being. And why do I bring that up as the church? Because I truly believe here in Canada, and probably other countries that are represented here as well, the evangelical church often has attachment issues with their Abba Father. And you might think that's kind of odd, but sometimes we have unhealthy relationship with our Father. Maybe we think we don't need him, or we act as if we do, but we're living as if we don't. And it's so important that we have a healthy attachment with God. And when we have a healthy attachment with God, when our roots are rooted in him, we also have healthier attachment with each other, and we are created for those connections, and we need that. So I'm going to go into, if you don't mind geeking out with me a little, I'm going to go into the attachment styles that you will never see in a church context like this, but I'm experimenting it on you because I do know that it is applicable to the body of Christ, and our need for attachment with God and each other. So you will see in the top quadrant is a secure attachment. This is what we strive for. This is the healthy child with a parent. They have a secure attachment. They will be more confident. They will be reciprocal. There's a give and a take, and there's a sense of confidence in, not insecurity in who they are. They won't be as reactive. They'll be more resilient. They'll be more risk-taking and be okay with falling, but getting up knowing that they are still loved. Who's our best example of this? It's Jesus, obviously. And that is the right answer in Sunday school and also in this workshop. Jesus had a strong sense of identity. He was in this earth, as you know, but he wasn't fazed by the expectations of others. He knew who he was. He knew who his Father was, and he knew the purpose that God had for him on that time. And he had a sense of fearlessness, a total reckless abandon, not in a sense where he was just going skydiving and being stupid. There's a sense of recklessness in his faith and ability to risk, because he knew his Abba Father had sent him. He knew who he was in Christ, and he had a deeper sense of morality that didn't need to be proven to the onlookers, nor posted on Instagram to get validation. The Father loved him. He had a purpose, and he was secure. And I think of the Imago Dei. If you understand that in the Latin term, there's a lot to unpack there, but the Imago Dei, the made in the image of Christ. And it's not so much that I have a relationship with God because I did ABC and prayer, and now I have salvation, and therefore I am somebody to God. No, Imago Dei is made in the image of Christ. Whether you're Jew or Gentile, whether you're a believer or not, whether you practice Hindu or you are a social worker, whether you are whoever, imagine your whole street, down your street, imagine the people all in your community. Imago Dei, God created them in his image. And God with us. There's a security in knowing. So when you and I have a secure attachment with God, we're okay with seeing people in the image of God. We're not threatened by that they look different, they believe different, they see things different. But we have to believe that God, who we are, who we're rooted in, that Imago Dei, that everyone is created in the image of Christ. And that God is with us. So whether we fall, whether we take risks for the Lord, whether we fall flat on our face, but we know that our Abba Father is there to pick us up because we have that secure attachment. Now, this is what we want. And rarely, just like in a parent-child, even with biological children, I have to work hard for secure attachment. Just because they were born to me, just because they are mine and they call me mom, doesn't mean that I automatically have secure attachment. That is something I yearn for, I work for. I maybe get it 30% of the time. And they say statistically, that's all right. That's better than nothing. That actually can produce resiliency in a child. And same with our churches. None of us have arrived there. Jesus can take that claim. None of us have arrived there. None of our churches have arrived there. None of the denominations have arrived there, but we are working on that. That attachment is a relationship, not a status. Yeah. And so that is something that we continuously need to gravitate towards, and building that attachment with our Abba Father. That if the Holy Spirit left our building, would we notice? All of those things, those projects and the programs and the organizations and the developments around our committee meetings, if God left that, would we still continue and actually thrive? Sometimes that is our downfall. Now, let's go into anxious, preoccupied attachment. There we will have churches that are more image conscious. Am I good enough? Do you like me? Will I be approved by you? Also anxious, preoccupied will say, we've got to bubble wrap our children. We've got to protect them. Let's move to a colony. Let's keep in a separate school. Let's not go let our children or our families interact with those people. Anxious, preoccupied would say, let's bubble wrap our church community. Maybe we're nervous at non-church functions, maybe attending there, we kind of feel insecure, like, should I be here? And what will people think? Or having non-church people in your functions, are you feeling self-conscious, like that teenager always second guessing if you got enough likes on Facebook or Instagram? Are we being like that in the church? And also anxious, preoccupied attachment as a church. Often we have trust issues, always second guessing about ulterior motives, about others, maybe outside of the church, or conspiracy things. And you don't have to look far. Let's just talk COVID. Boom, I stepped on some people's toes. But wearing masks or not wearing masks, can we trust the motives of medical staff? If they get it wrong, do we, the church, do we have security? Can we still be the church no matter what goes on around us, what other people think? Can we still engage in a healthy relationship with our community, within our church community, and most definitely with God? That would be anxious, preoccupied. Now we're going to go down to that darker gray box there. Dismissive, avoidant. There we want to hide under a rock. Okay, let's not deal with it. Those are pretty big emotions. Those are big topics. So let's just sweep things under the rug. That's not healthy for a church. That's not getting to our roots. That's not knowing our roots. We're just avoiding things, and we're not addressing the elephants in our sanctuaries. It makes us uncomfortable. We're not making those big decisions that we need to do. We're afraid of offending somebody. And so we're just going to hold off. But that actually prevents us from having healthy attachment with God. That actually prevents leadership from truly being godly leadership and what they've called us to lead people in. And we're trying to avoid those big, difficult feelings of anger or fear or sadness and grief. We don't want to be raw with each other because it's ugly. It feels not good. And that is an attachment style that we will find a lot in kids within the foster care, that we have to earn that secure attachment so that they can grow and be very effective in their community. And then we're going to go on to the last one, is fearful avoidance. And here they respond very poorly to negative emotions. They're very sensitive to these things, and they have a negative view of self or negative view of their church. Like, do you get those people that like to roast the pastor every time, or like, nothing you do is right, no program is good enough, and everything is like doom and gloom? They're kind of the Eeyores, or maybe the church is the Eeyore. I've seen churches on social media, oh my goodness, that nothing that the government does, nothing social service does, nothing that the community does is good enough for their church community. And they're often commitment phobic, of getting involved and making mistakes. And those are kind of the Eeyore type of attachments that aren't healthy when we want to be effective. And it actually, all three of these prevent us from being effective in the community. So it's not so much, here's the 1, 2, 3, and this is how you can like if you give hot dogs with this kind of cool mustard, they're going to come. Or if you give a coffee bar in your, like, everybody's got to have coffee bars and then your churches are going to grow. No, it's not about those things. We actually look at ourselves when Harold is counseling adoptive and foster families, taking on huge risks, taking on huge responsibilities with these kids with attachment issues. They often say, why are you talking about us? Why don't you talk about this child who comes with FASD? Why don't you talk about this child that is coming with all these issues and these dysfunctions? Yes, we want to talk about that. We want to address it. But let's talk here first, because if we don't have a healthy attachment, if we don't look at our own issues, guess what? It's actually going to prevent your church from being invaluable in your community. So this is important. These are internal discussions that before you start collecting soup cans to give and make an impact, and before you start making these baskets to go out there and save the world, let's do some homework first to know our motives, know our security of what the motives of why we are working in our community. It will actually, and it's not a do this and then that. I know in attachment, it's an ongoing process, but let's go there first as we go into the community and look at how, God, do you want us to be effective in the community? So I know I'm going through this very quickly. Feel free to put things in the chat. I'm more than happy to discuss this. Actually, I have Harold on the call too. So I said he can jump in at any time. I don't usually let him interrupt me. That's not a good marital thing. But in this case, I said, come on in. He's more expert than I on these things. But when it comes to working with churches, I've seen such a correlation, and I've seen such a difference when churches are securely attached. There's a freedom about those congregations that allows them to be authentic and be real, to take risks and do the Jesus way. And I think that's beautiful. And just so you know that secure attachment, it's not if you have it or you don't, your church has it or you don't, and you're stuck there. It is you can actually have what is called earned secure attachment. And that is actually, if you work towards earned secure attachment as your church, that actually does more good than if you've got it all together. So if you are a church, this is the good news. If you're a church and say, oh, shoot, I realize there's some things that we haven't done right, that's okay. But be authentic in your community that you're working to earn that secure attachment with your Abba Father. They can see that. They can see the fruit that comes when you are the vine, I'm the vine, you are the branches. If a man remains in me, if a church remains in me and I in him, there will be some fruit. They will see that. And, but yeah, let's go on to number 2. Get connected. A church with secure attachment is able to venture outside their own structures and be church in the community. And so this is just very practical, actually. And I encourage you to, do you know your MP? Do you know your MLA? I'm not saying, did you elect them? Do you agree with what their positions are? I'm saying, have you called them up for coffee? Would you feel fine with inviting them to consult on certain things that matter to you as well? Not in lobbying, but just saying, have you ever said, what's your day like? What are the pressures in this community? Because actually you can learn from them. Do you know by name the Indigenous elders on your lands, in your treaty lands? Do you know them? Would you know who to call if you needed to understand certain things, or if you're feeling called to reach out in different ways? Would you be able to have that conversation with them? Do you know other churches in your community? I'm not just talking about a monthly prayer gathering where you kind of navel gaze. I'm talking about, would you be able to worship together? Would you be able to have coffee together? Would you be able to consult together? Would you be able to see the Imago Dei in the other denominations that you're working with, that maybe you don't have the corner on theology, maybe they have something, and the Catholics, oh my goodness, could they teach me something? These are things that I'm learning over time. Do you know your child welfare professionals? Do you know the social services address? Do you know where to go to when a family in your neighborhood is in crisis? Do you have a relationship with them? Do you know other nonprofits, maybe even nonprofits, let's be honest, that are in competition with yours? We don't like to think of competition, but let's face it, we've got these encampments. So do you know those other nonprofits? Are you able to have coffee with them? And probably all of you have examples of knowing these people, and you could attest to the fact that there is so much value to your congregation, to you as an individual, as a leader in your church, as a member of your church, that when you have those, it pays off dividends. Everybody wins when there's collaboration, and it's not easy. We don't want to romanticize it. Sometimes we have to learn how to work with people very different than ours. But that Imago Dei, do we see the presence of God in other people? Do we see them as created in the image of God, created that they desire connection, whether they believe in God or whether they say there is no God, or whether they believe in a totally different God system? We have to believe our roots, that we are created in the image of God, that God is our creator, and that every human being is made in the image of God, and that they are created for connection. That's not shoving Jesus down their throat. It's just actually affirming with what will resonate within their soul. And I've never seen that disproven. And I've worked with a lot of people in different spheres, and people say, how can you work with child welfare being a Christian organization? How is that even possible? Don't you get a lot of door slams? I get a lot of awkward moments, absolutely, because they're like, you're the church lady, and this is awkward. We've never done coffee with them. And one time I did, or one of these occasions I did, and at the end they said, we have to be honest with you, we were petrified to talk with the church lady. We thought you were this old lady with an Afghan, and we didn't know what to do with you. We thought you might want to invite us to your church, and we didn't know what to do with it. We're a secular organization. We don't really have room for the church. This is not something we usually do. But our higher uppers, who I had coffee with in government, said, you've got to meet this organization. You've got to work with them. And so we were mandated to. So we'll be honest, we didn't want to meet you, but we had to. But we had connection. We had coffee, we had connection. We realized that we humanized the experience, and suddenly we weren't these polar opposites that couldn't work together. Suddenly we were caring for the same children. Our hearts were burdened. We were in our professions for the same reason. It was for the children. And those are those opportunities that you want to arrive. So some practical tips. Do some community mapping. If you don't know what that is, Google it. It's a common community development practice. Just know your neighborhood. Know what's out there. You'd be surprised how many different church plants that have come up over the last couple of years that you might not know and you might want to reach out to. You might not know where social services is, the police. There's a lot of different organizations. Map that area out. I would encourage you to go to Waybase. We've been working with them. They're a Christian organization that has everything mapped out for you. So this is a cheat sheet. Go on to Waybase, I think .com or something, and it'll give your city stats. You will know your demographic. You will see everything there for you, but study that. Connect with the history of that land. What land was this really on? And this is something that I've been learning as a Mennonite settler, 5th generation, sitting on our land in Red River Valley, thinking it was terra nullius, it was undiscovered land, it hadn't been developed. That's what it was given to the Anabaptist people, the Mennonite people, only to realize now, which has not been shared enough in the Mennonite history, that it was stolen land. It was land that was not inhabited. It was actually used for hunting and fishing and agriculture and all kinds of things. And you think of Yancey, I'll just say for an example, in the Steinbach Kleefeld area, that was Métis land. It was taken by the Canadian government and given over to the Mennonites. Important, valuable land. You know how rich that land is right now? Well, that was stolen land, and we are part of that. So get connected with your history, and that's not a doom and gloom, but understand it. It's going to give you a better connection when you talk with that elder. And be relationally focused. People don't want to be projects. They want to be in relationship with you and treat them like humans. And I think that goes without being said, but don't come with so much of an agenda that you don't see the person that is struggling. One time, my husband and I, we went to meet with the Minister of Families here in the province, who overlooks all child welfare and all the authorities across the province. We're having this meeting. It was at the height of a lot of political, it was just a hot zone. When is it hot? It's still a hot zone. Across Canada, it's a hot zone. So we met with this official leader. And before we did, I called the secretary and said, what kind of Starbucks do you want? You guys have had a long week. Let me know what you need. We're coming in for the meeting. And so she's like, we've never had that before. What do you mean? Like, I said, I know you've had a tough week. We're coming for a meeting anyway. So this is the least we can do. So she comes back and she's like, oh, our minister of families was so excited. She was so surprised. She's never been asked that before. She usually gets sweared at. And she wants this vanilla latte, extra hot, soy, whatever, all the things that they order. And I said, but what about yours? What about your secretaries? Well, we're not in that meeting. I said, yeah, but you're still pinch hitting. You're still in that zone too, aren't you? She says, yeah, it's just been terrible. And so anyway, long story short, we showed up with like 9 or 10 different drinks and they were in tears. Said, we've never had this before. We didn't know that we could have these kind of relationships. And there was reconciliation there. And we weren't there to teach them anything. We weren't there to ask them for money. We were just there to say, we know the church has not showed up in this sphere. And there's a lot that the church is called to do, but we haven't been there. We know there's skeletons in our closet, but how can we support what you do? And it changes the dynamic. It changes the connection that you have. It wasn't to suck up to them. It was actually authentically to say, do we have something what is it that we can do? We're not trying to take your authority. We're not trying to do something else. We want to work with you. And this is why we do it. It's like a gospel moment. I just didn't keep Christianese in there. Otherwise, we could have had a kumbaya. But that is the essence of the gospel, being in those situations. But you have to be intentional about it. And so I remember one time I was doing community development prior with the Salvation Army, and we had just been developing this new building, a $5 million project. It was so exciting. It was so needed in this underdeveloped neighborhood. And we were about to move in. And then, of course, everybody gets excited. Everybody wants to be a program in your building. And so I had this church come. And they were an existing church, a small church. And they said, we want to relocate. We want to replant ourselves in this community. I said, okay, well, let's have coffee. Let's meet. I want to hear your story. And as they were saying that, I think they were really infatuated with the building, to be honest. And I said, but what will happen to you've been around for so many years. What will happen to that neighborhood across the city when you relocate here? How will the community even know, or like, how would the community be impacted by this? What they thought was an affirmation in the right direction was actually, the conversation ended right there. They said, not to worry, Wendi, they will never know. It's okay. We don't really have anybody coming from our neighborhood anyway. So it's really not that, but we would just, and could we have a bigger parking lot? And funny thing is, we had the most concentrated population in all of Winnipeg right there on foot. I said, if we didn't have one stall here, we would be jam-packed full in this neighborhood. We don't need a parking lot. But just that idea, if you moved out of the neighborhood, would your neighbors notice? There was a lack of connection there. And so connecting with others is part of our connection with God. And God is for people of other cultures. God is for the marginalized. He is for the refugee. He is for the sex trade worker in your community. And there are them. I used to work in social justice prior to that, and they're everywhere. Even in the rural. God is for the person in prison. God is for the pregnant teen. God is for the birth mom whose kids are in foster care. God is for the youth aging out of foster care. And there's a verse in Matthew 18:5 that says, whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. And that verse kind of arrested me. And we're talking about churches. Do we want the presence of God? Do we want that secure attachment? Yes, we do. I think the right answer is yes, we do. But if we want that attachment with God, if we want more of the presence of God with us, it actually is intrinsically connected with God with them. with those people in our community. If you want to grow a closer attachment with God and have that security, you actually have to welcome other people in, the marginalized, all those people that I listed. The child is one such example. You benefit, your church benefits, and it's not to use people. It's how we are created. We are imago Dei. We are created for connection. God is a connecting God. And so I just want welcoming people isn't philanthropy. It's God's nature. And we're actually welcoming the presence of God. And I can say how many times God has brought people onto our doorstep, into our home, and they say, how could you do that? We could never do that. We're not those type of people and blah, blah, blah. But we have been so blessed. And I say that those are the people, the people that we were there to reach were the ones that actually were the anointed ones, that God with us was inherently part of our connection with them. And even if they never joined our church, even though they never believe what I believe, but there was a connection there that is so important. So get connected. And you will know in Matthew 25, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger, invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go and visit you? King will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters, you did for me. So those people in your neighborhood, in your like Zoom pew, I call them now, or in your physical pew that come in from the community, those people across the street, see Christ imago Dei in them. You are doing it as unto the Lord. And so being connected is just so, so, so valuable. The third thing is being a student. And I just want to be mindful of the time. My goodness, yes, we're going to fire hose this here. Being a student, when you connect, I can't stress this enough. I preach it to myself. I'm a learner in this myself, so I'm not speaking as an expert. But when you connect with that youth, when you connect with that sex trade worker, when you connect with that social worker, that policeman, or that politician, or that mom that's losing their children, or that, you name it, take the student seat before you take the pulpit or the volunteer role. Before you're the philanthropist or the preacher of telling them how to fix their lives, please consider giving yourself permission to be the student. That doesn't mean we as a church are dumb or we don't have anything valuable. We're sitting on gold, guys. This is the kingdom stuff that we're holding on. But if we don't listen, if we're not the student first, we run a very high risk of hurting when we're trying to help, because we haven't listened to the context. We run a very high risk of missing opportunities to hear from God. I have heard so much prophetic voice through the mom who is homeless that just lost her kid, who came through 54 different foster homes. I have heard so much prophetic voice through the social workers that were despised in media, that are lambasted on social media, even by the church. I've seen so much imago Dei in our community that there's nothing short of pride that's keeping us from being the student. And so how can your whole church become invaluable to the community? Give permission to be the student. So who are your professors? They're right around you. You don't have to go to get your master's. Yeah, go for it. I encourage you. I did it myself, but that's not where I got the best of my training. My training was actually living in an impoverished neighborhood in Bolivia, where the education was probably no higher, the average education no higher than a 5th grade. That was my best education ever. My best education has been through that mom that lost her home and her kids that came to live with us. My best education is through my children. My best education is through the people that media despises and that community just scoffs at. Because whether I agree with their values or not, see, if I have a secure attachment, I'm okay with that. I'm not insecure about, oh my goodness, I might get the cooties when I touch them. But if my attachment is secure, then I'm okay with having different values. I'm okay with different worldviews. In fact, I want to learn their worldviews as part of embracing Imago Dei, the God with us. And so the people right around you, Indigenous people, there's stories, there's oral traditions, there's hurts. Be ready for that. Make sure your attachment is earned secure, because you don't want to listen to that. You want to put that under the rug, or you want to just be negative Nelly about that. But earn that security with God and with each other. Listen to your Indigenous peoples, the struggling families, the ones with addictions, those with mental illness. Give voice. I saw that there's a workshop here being presented this weekend. There is a lot of value, a lot of prophetic words spoken to people that are struggling, and God is with them in that. And there's a sincerity. Blessed are the poor in spirit, when we're impoverished and we need God to heal us. Let's listen and let's learn. Listen to the people with neurodiversities. I have people in my own family on the autism spectrum who we can't go to church right now often because church is not safe. And I've been told by a pastor that my behavior of my child who was dysregulated, we tried to work things through, that was a sin root, and that maybe it was from my Korean heritage, that there was ancestral things and there was kind of a voodoo behind that. And that was painful. That cost 2 of my children from ever entering back into child wealth or into the children's program at this church. And so being a student, and I had to give some more books and learning on this and what dysregulation looks like and how to create those safe environments. And we'll talk about that soon. That's huge. So how can you become invaluable? Listen, learn from our people. They're there to teach you. Learn from other denominations and other professions. And people are not your projects. And so does something in your community puzzle you? Are you frustrated by anything? Disturbed by the behaviors of people different than you? These are golden opportunities. These are actually your invitations to be a student. Be curious. This is a great opportunity, great invitation to not judge, but become a student. Understand, it always makes sense at the end. Once you learn their story, once you learn their worldview, it always makes sense. And here's some things that we need to learn as the church and even as the Mennonite church about residential schools here across Canada. And we just coming through the understanding of 215 children in Kamloops, that bodies that were found. This should grip the church because the church was involved. But you're saying, wait a minute, that was the Catholic Church or the Anglican Church. We're Mennonites, we were just good farmers. We were the pacifists. We didn't go to war. We're the peace-loving kind. Yes, but we were also the stealers of land who benefited from the white privilege and the supremacy of our nation that continues to thrive. We also were part of the 60s scoop. And the 60s scoop, for those of you that are new to that, is when children were forcibly removed from Indigenous families. It was part of the Indian Act, kill the Indian in the child. This is a deliberate act of cultural genocide. We were part of that. We were taking them in by storm. So you say, wait a minute, I know somebody that did that and they were good people. Of course, it's systemic racism. It's systemic oppression. It's actually like putting things under the rug and let's just close our ears and not listen, not see them. We're seeing the Indigenous people as flora and fauna, as they call them, and savages. These are the language of at the time that we settled here, our forefathers, 5 generations ago, they were considered savages and flora and fauna. They didn't belong to the land. They were just people that existed around us. So they were disposable. We could do with what we wanted of the kids. And we took them into our homes, our Mennonite homes. You're going to see Zacharias and Friesen and Clausen, all with Indigenous brown skin in our family lineage out of the 60s scoop. And we haven't done a lot about that. We will see foster care. And I think there's a lot of need for foster care. We're huge advocates for foster care, but without the proper being a student, Families want to rescue the child, being that white savior mentality. And we have to look at what are our motives. Are we rescuing them so they can live in suburbia with 2.5 children in a attached garage so that they are good and their rural life is bad? Or are we going to support those families so that they can thrive and build relationships with those families? Yes, we do have a role in this as being a student. Missionary movements. We've been part of colonization. We've been part of giving white Western mentality religion into contexts that they've had historic oral traditions of knowing who God is. And yet we've said, you have to do it in the hymn way. You have to dress like us and act like us. And we've done things with possibly good intentions. There's been a lot of good efforts, but it hasn't always been helpful. And I just think I went on a mission trip in a Bible college. I was in a few semesters here in Canada and we went up north. Absolutely no education as being a student of this culture. We were plopped in there to be vacation Bible school experts and work with kids. Yes, we did learn and we were to be with the people, but I wasn't given any of this history. We were there with that old evangelical model of just colonization and coming in there to share the gospel. And that's messy. We have to own that. And I see that in Bolivia too. There's a lot of colonization, even in the EMMC, and how we did it, how we expected them to do church without seeing the indigenous inherent imago Dei within them of how God connected with them. And so there's some of that in there as well that we have to own up. I'll show you a few pictures here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. Here's some historic, some of you are history buffs. I see data on there, so you can eat up all this dates and languages. This is showing some of our history of Mennonite people going into residential schools. We were teachers there as well. Some of, maybe not in this denomination, but some other denominations as well. But Mennonites were brought to be residential school teachers. Here's a picture of one in Northwestern Ontario that were all Mennonite teachers. Here's more history of Mennonite volunteers in a children's home, which is an orphanage of extracted kids out of their communities, out of their moms and dads' arms. We were part of that. So this is why we're doing it. I'm not saying this to be doom and gloom. I'd like to shift the atmosphere here a little bit, but this is why we find that in Forever Families, we need to equip the church. If we're going to invite the church into the community, if we're going to invite the church to be relevant in their context, we also have to do due diligence in providing opportunities for training. And that doesn't mean that we're the experts. We often work with, I have different Indigenous friends that I bring in to do some teachings with us that are born again believers. We work with other organizations as well. One of the things that we focus on is understanding poverty. Not just like you should work harder, pull up your bootstraps, not just let's give them a food basket or let's make a soup kitchen and things will be better. But how do we understand our role in poverty and our systemic privilege that we have inherently as white evangelicals? And what are the ways that we can move forward in a good way? And so these are very practical. This is something that your whole congregation could be part of. It's not just the scholar in your church or the missions team. No, we believe that the whole church is called to care. It's biblical, that everybody is called to care for others. And we believe that we need to offer some unique opportunities of integrating our Christian theology. We're overtly Christian in our roots, but blending that our theology with practical ways of integrating that into our society. Because one thing in Saskatchewan, I'm good friends with the leader of the Saskatchewan Foster Family Association that oversees the foster families across the province. And she said, and she's called me, and the reason that we work together is because they were having some rough patches with other churches and stuff. They're wanting to help, but they're doing things a little abrasive. It wasn't coming down. I talked with the church leaders and I understand their heart, but there was a conflict. And so I was there to mediate. And she said, we need to work with Forever Families as a mitigator because churches sometimes act weird about things. Her words. Sometimes churches mean well, but they act weird about it. And I don't always trust their motives. Is it a switch and bait? Could we work with you? Because you can translate, you understand social services because we worked in it in the past and you understand the church. I went to school with the pastors in seminary. Go figure, a Mennonite woman in seminary with a bunch of male pastors, but that was helpful, And so we find ourselves, and not just me, our team is growing, finding ourselves being in that middle ground. So understanding poverty, trauma care is essential. Understanding how to look beyond the behavior, and how to really make our children's ministries, our camp ministries, our youth ministries, our seniors ministries, they come through trauma as well. Are we creating safety in a place, and are we able to bring them to a better level of healing? Or are we misdiagnosing? Are we seeing the behavior and interpreting that as sin, or interpreting that as willful dismissal, or willful things that are like they should just know better? But trauma care makes a difference. It saves families, it saves churches. Faith and culture is something that we also talk about. Navigating faith and culture. Some of my friends and I, we go on with this discussion of what are those hot topics, those elephants in your sanctuary that you're scared of with Indigenous culture and spirituality. And how can we navigate? How can we journey together in a good way that keeps our roots deep? That secure attachment with God. We're not wondering, am I doing it right, or am I going to offend somebody? We keep rooted well with God, but that we're authentically able to be in relationship with Indigenous and hearing from our Indigenous brothers and sisters. And then healthy collaboration. How do we work with social services? Those are things that people want to care. Your congregation, none of them want to be jerks. Let's just put it out there. Nobody, I don't want to be a jerk. Your congregation doesn't want to be jerks. But sometimes without being that student, without that understanding of the context, sometimes we create more barriers than we create bridges. And so people want to care, but sometimes we just need those stepping stones, those practicalities of bringing our theology and our society together into a context that we can flesh out. It's practical. So here's just a little shameless plug. We're going to be hosting an 18-hour, it's a 6-week course on Saturday mornings, geared for the whole church. And we're also inviting camp ministries, social workers. We have different groups, and also foster and adoptive families. We have a group for them as well. But we're coming together for an intensive. You can get certified. I would encourage every church to get their youth workers, camp workers, ministry workers involved for sure, if not everybody. But this is a great opportunity, very practical, where neuroscience catches up with God. We're looking at the neuroscience and how God created the brain, and how actually there's healing, and how we can bring people to a greater level of healing. And so these are just the core essentials, and we can do it on demand or live. Preferably live. It gives the best living room experience. You really get to know each other and interact with the professors. They're the team that we have on our team, that they're all trained professionals in a variety of contexts. So you see the website up there. You might want to follow that up. I'm not doing it because we need to get our numbers in. I think they'll fill, but I'm rooting for EMMC. I think you guys can be very effective in your communities, and you have so many strengths and assets. If with a few more tools, this is going to blow your world open in how people they're longing to be understood in their trauma, especially coming through pandemic. You're going to need it. And number 4, create safety. This is very much tied into trauma-informed care, why we do trauma-informed care, because you want to create congregations that are safe. I'll give you an example. I was invited, my husband and I were invited into the Caribbean to visit some friends, and they took us on this little expedition. I don't know if any of you've gone to swim with stingrays. Now, some of you will get a thrill out of this, but me, not so much. My amygdala, if you talk about neuroscience, my amygdala was flapping. I wasn't too comfortable with the water, with my gear, and for sure not with these big flappy puppies that were coming, lapping up and wanting to eat fish from my hand. I was just screaming like a little schoolgirl. And if you know me, I'm not one to scream a lot. I'm not hugely emotive in those kind of ways, but there was something about that experience that it was just my shark music was going off the charts. I couldn't get off into that boat fast enough. In fact, I leaped onto the top of one of the guides for the stingrays. I leaped on top of him because I couldn't handle these stingrays all coming at me. They were swarming in. And then the guy said, I wouldn't do that, Mama. I'm holding the fish. And so I actually was getting more stingrays coming to me. But here's the thing. In the church, there are things that you might find normal that are stingrays to others, that are triggers to others that you don't even know. So pay attention to that student, but create felt safety. Those kids with autism, those residential school survivors with trauma, those people of different cultures that have come through war, those people struggling with domestic violence behind the scenes that you don't know about. You need to create felt safety, that it is okay to be in those waters with you. It's like that life ring. Give them those life rings. Make sure that you understand your congregation and the people around you in your community when you reach out. Because for many, what is normal to you will be stingrays to others, and you're not going to get the reaction that you're hoping for. And I certainly wouldn't want more stingrays in my life. And I appreciate the fact that I was given safety. And I would trust this company again because they gave me safety. I would go back to them. And in the community, there are outreach measures you might find kind and helpful, but are stingrays. The handouts, even the quote unquote adoption rescues. Orphan care is a trigger word here in Canada. It brings on a whole lot of stingrays for a lot of people. So those are things you just have to discover, and it'll be unique to your context. And so are you creating connections that disarm fears? That's something when your church wants to become invaluable in the community, you want to create connections that are actually disarming fears rather than raising suspicions. Or are you being weird about it? Are you being authentic? Are you being okay with certain emotions? And actually, I'm going to take you into this. I wasn't sure if I'd have time. I'll just throw it out there, and then you can maybe do this as an exercise on your own. This is what we call circle of security. And this is a concept in counseling psychology that we do in learning about the circles of security. So on your piece of paper, when you have time, draw a circle on there. Think of your church. This is also used in psychotherapy with children and families and your origins and your upbringing. But in the context of your church, think of that church as your circle. Now, jot down those words because you're going to need them, or I can actually send you guys, if you want, I can send you the slide deck. But those words, they're not there. Don't copy them exactly where they're at. But look at those words and what is safe in that circle of your church. I put joy in there. I'm giving you a cheat sheet. I put joy in there because yes, we love to celebrate. Hallelujah, Christ is risen. He's risen indeed. And all the good news and somebody coming to the Lord. So we can certainly celebrate joy in our congregation, in my experience. What about sadness? Can you grieve together? Some can. Some are very good at grieving together. And others, maybe it's something more private and you don't feel safe to shed a tear or to tell somebody, how are you doing? Oh, I'm not doing so well, I'm sad. Is it safe for you to do that there? That's important to recognize. Are you able to express fears in your church, in your congregation? Or others able to, that are part of your congregation, that interact with your congregation? Are they able to express fears? Fears of the pandemic? Fears of theology changing, fears of society, of what's happening? Are they able to express fears of their diagnosis? Is it safe for them to express that? Are they able to express doubts in Sunday school? Ask those big questions without feeling ridiculed. Oh my goodness, I thought you were a Christian. Are you able to express shame in your congregation and in your community? Abortion. There's a lot of shame around abortion, and I am pro-life as it will get. In our line of work, we believe in from conception to natural death. But is there room for grieving the lost children of people that have had an abortion in your community? So it's happening in your church. But because shame is not allowed in that circle, they're not going to tell you about it. It's hidden. Because addictions is shameful, they're not going to tell you I'm struggling with addictions. Because domestic violence is shameful, they're not going to be disclosing that. And but what will they do? Hallelujah, praise the Lord, Christ is risen indeed. We'll go to that. But we're not being authentic. We're not creating that security for our people. Same with anger. Is it okay? Or is there proper ways and avenues of expressing anger in a healthy and productive way? Can you be curious? Can your youth be curious? People don't, like they say in this next generation, they don't want to be told what to think. They don't want to be theologized and doctrinized. They want to be curious. They want to seek truth with you. Is it okay for your youth to seek truth with you? Or are you going to preach it from the pulpit and tell them what to think? Because I can guarantee you're going to lose a generation that way, because it's not safe. It's not secure for your community. And it's not a place that's a place where they can be curious together and seek truth together. And so I'm not saying that your church has all these things, but these are things typically that as churches we need to wrestle with in understanding, is our church safe? Rather than just serving a child out there or serving a mom or serving that social worker in the community, is it safe for them to be their whole self? Because if we're not safe with that and we're honest, they won't be safe either. And they will sense that. And so we want to create security. We want to create some connection. We want to create an atmosphere of being a student, that humility. We want to also create that space of safety. And lastly, and we're going to land here because we have 10 more minutes, and put those questions in the chat. I'm going to be in the exhibit after for sure. Faith without works is dead, right? We know that. We Mennonites, we know that. We really got this down because we love to take action. We love to do a lot of stuff. We're hard workers. I think this is something that the Anabaptists bring a wealth to all denominations as the body of Christ. And that's not something we take lightly. And I think that's great. There's so many opportunities too. And yet we don't want to be just action oriented if we haven't done those first pour. So if I was doing this to another denomination, I say, let's have her here. Why I haven't given as much thought here is because I think we got to do some more work in the 1, 2, 3, and 4. But there are lots of opportunities. We don't have to go on mission trips. We don't have to sign up for some extravagant opportunity out there. It's right next door to you. In your neighborhoods, you have group homes, you have addiction centers, you have people struggling that don't feel safe to talk about domestic violence. There's a lot of hurt and need in your community, especially with child welfare and the poverty and the prevention that we could do as the church. And we as the church are called to this. This isn't something optional. You don't have to pray about it. Lord, tell me if our church should get involved in loving our neighbor. You know that. We know that we are to love our neighbor. And people want to love our neighbor, but we often just don't know how. And so we just have to learn to take those next steps. If we have a secure attachment, if our roots are deeply rooted in Christ, we can take those risks. We can take those next steps knowing that Abba Father's got our back. He knows us. He can nurture us in that. He can guide us. The Holy Spirit is here to guide us and illuminate our path. We know that. So people in your congregations, they want to be part of this, but it's going to take leadership that's willing to risk, willing to be secure in that, willing to not worry about if they get the cooties, if they go into an area that isn't traditional for a church to be in. Jesus did that all the time. But the problem, there's a few problems, and I'm going to side with the church on this, that there's a lot of problems, and this is why we needed to form a nonprofit. We weren't going to at first to do what we're doing, but we needed to, because there's privacy acts. So you don't know that there's a group home down your street. You don't have privy information to these things that used to be just in community in the gossip line. You just hear about this, and so-and-so's neighbor had a heart attack and whatever. Now medical records, you don't get access to that. We're busy with programs. We become a lot more programized as churches. We become institutionalized. And so with that, we follow a structure more than the relationships in the community. And so that's sort of a lost art. We're not introducing something new, but it's something that we have to get back to. But that's just the endemic of our society. It's not an EMMC thing, so don't go shaming yourself. We lack those connections in the community. And there's a lot of fear, and fear is real. We have to acknowledge that our congregations are fearful to get into messy, and there's risks. There are absolutely risks. One church pastor leaned in, a prominent leader, and he's like, Wendi, I know, I see what you're saying, but you realize that this is very risky, right? And I said, absolutely. I said, I don't think at the end of the day, Jesus says, well done, you played it safe, church. God didn't put us here on earth to play it safe and to make a nice, comfortable club for ourselves, and so that we can just experience joy. We need to get into the nitty gritty, just like he did in his 33 years. And we have to also affirm in each other that your gifts, my gifts, can make a difference. It's not just a church leader. It's not somebody that's charismatic. It's not somebody that's just empathic by nature. It could be a plumber. It could be a cookie baker. Everybody has a part in the child welfare system and in your community. And this is discipleship. And so making your church invaluable in the community is actually a great discipleship model to making sure everybody in the church is living out their fullest potential, who God has created them, is actually part of their creating earned secure attachment, actually, with the relationship with God and each other in the community. And so it just makes good sense as a leader to nurture this. And I'm going to just ask you a question. Here in Canada, we like coffee a lot. And you can guess how many there are. We don't have time for this, but I'm going to just say anytime I want coffee, I love coffee. Anytime I want coffee, I can go anywhere. Across Canada, if I'm on a road trip, I can pick up a cup of Java anytime I want to. And this is how many coffee shops of Tim Hortons and Starbucks, the most prominent ones that we have now in 2021. There's 5,700 coffee shops, and that sort of covers our bases for the most part. Guess how many churches there are? There's estimated around 24,000. So you think if I can go for coffee anywhere I want and get my needs filled with caffeine, imagine our child welfare system of the thousands of people in our communities that need supports, the people with addictions, the people that need it the most. There are churches on almost every postal code, and there's a lot of postal codes. We're doing all that work right now in our system, and this is doable. If every church was connected, equipped, and mobilized, there would be just safe havens for so many people. And it is happening right now. So I'm going to share with you, here's some things that once we've given church communities opportunities to care, they're actually rising to the occasion. And it's really exciting to see. We have this thing called Care Portal, and you can go onto our website, foreverfamilies.ca. It's a platform that allows churches, and we're right now in 5 communities, that allows churches to get on and get connected. So the social worker puts in the request because it comes through us. We're the mitigator in between. They put on a request like that. It automatically goes to churches in that region that are signed up with us, that are getting trained with us, and they can respond to the needs of children. And so just in the last short little while, we have 24 churches in our nation, and our plan is to go national. And we're in Ontario, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, working on Atlantic Canada right now. And just the impact that it is making, because churches are just saying yes. And this is part of, and there's different ways that we can say yes to it. It could be a stroller. It could be helping a youth age out into your neighborhood, into an apartment. There's so many ways, and churches just want to care. And they just need to be shown those connections, those next steps. And it's part of taking action. And that is all in that fire hydrant that I have for you. And I hope I'm going to turn it over to you, Daryl, and we'll take it from here. 1 minute to go.
Okay. We got 5 minutes yet.
Okay, good.
5:15, we're good. So we got 6 minutes-ish. So
awesome.
If you have a question, you can either quickly chat it or turn your microphone on and go for it. I'd love to hear them. I don't want to waste the time. I want you to have your chance to ask your questions. Don't be shy.
Okay, so I have a question. Am I allowed to ask questions?
Yes, yes.
Okay, I see some good pastors out here. So, and there's other leaders in the church and other people that have a lot of experience. So I'm just going to put it out there. Are they able to speak on microphone? Or they just put in the chat?
They all have access to the microphones as far as
I've never known an EMMC without a voice, so I'm going to put this on you guys. What are some things that you guys are doing? What is successful in your communities that you are already doing? And is there something like Care Portal that would be helpful for people in your congregation to be able to take that stroller across the street? What is your feel? How does this connect with your own experience?
I think I'm going to speak right away. I think Care Portal would be really beneficial here in Steinbach. Again, a lot of it is, and I think speaking of our church, we don't know the needs.
Right.
We haven't done the exploration you've done, we haven't made those connections, and that's on us. I totally recognize that, but we honestly often don't know what the needs are.
Mm-hmm. No, that's valid. Yeah, and it's hard to find those needs, right? Because if you're not in those spaces, yeah. What about
anybody
others?
else? Yes, David Funk. Who else is a pastor here that I know of?
I went to school with David.
Yeah, it's me. We went to school twice together.
I think so. Yeah.
That's SBC right. In Providence. You mentioned the fire hose. Mm-hmm. And I'd encourage you to interpret the lack of questions at this point to just attribute that to the fact that we're trying to digest. But one question that I have in relation to your urgent encouragement to us to be learners in our communities, which so much. I'm thinking about our congregation. And I'm anticipating that, especially in some ways when it comes to issues of truth and reconciliation and our Indigenous neighbors, there is a feeling of resistance. I think that would come up, and I'm wondering if you've got 3 easy steps for us pastors to help our congregations successfully navigate this resistance when it comes up.
Yeah, no, that is very common. And I would say fear is probably the number one barrier. So if you can identify what it is that's holding people back, that often uncovers the most. And from our experience, we've been doing blanket exercises and having these topics. You need to create that felt safety actually for the believers, that felt safety that their concerns could be heard, that they're not going to be lambasted or challenged or threatened or shamed in those experiences, that we create that felt safety, that we address their fears. And that's often why an ally like myself with an Indigenous friend like my friend Jimmy Thunder, we do these things together. So I actually go into his Indigenous settings and he comes into my white settings, and we talk together about this and create that atmosphere of safety. Because you can't actually, the amygdala, you can't actually talk to the frontal cortex of the church's brains, like the people in your brains. You can't, the people in your church, you can't talk to their point of reasoning and creativity and imagining what if their amygdala is flapping, that they're in fight, flight, or freeze mode. So you actually have to create that felt safety so that they can actually feel safe to explore what if. And also there's a huge responsibility on pastors and leaders to create that earned secured attachment as congregations, so they don't feel threatened by thinking and seeing other worldviews. So that isn't even humanitarian or truth and reconciliation, but that's foundational attachment work that needs to be done in congregations so that they can take away that fear, because fear is an insecure attachment with Abba Father, where perfect love casts out all fear, right? And who is God is God is love, and there's attachment in God, but fear does not come from God, and we have to address that probably. That's a great question, though. And I think we hear that. And that's why we're creating workshops that are safe, and it should feel safe. I can give you actually copies of past workshops. So I've done that with pastors that actually feel nervous of inviting people, and we let them see it first.
Thank you very much, Wendi. Our time is
Thank
fast.
you.
And we got like 8 seconds left. So thank you so much. And thanks to all of you for listening in. I know you have lots of questions. You'll have to go to her,
I'll be in the
booth.
exhibit hall. Yep.
Exactly. Yeah. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great weekend.